I want to welcome our audience to this L.E.A.R.N podcast. It is in these podcasts that L.E.A.R.N wants you to meet experts that can help you in your work as school leaders or perhaps partners in the education landscape. The topic for this podcast is iterative review process, and our guest is Mark Gerner, CEO of RADAND. On the L.E.A.R.N website, you will find on the research page under the COE of Innovation and the element of iterative review process, research in this area being discussed, along with potential resources to access. Mark, I want to welcome you to the L.E.A.R.N podcast. It's good to have you here to speak with us about this important topic. Now, I know you have an extensive research and work background in the area of iterative review process with a special focus on design thinking. Would you please share with the audience some of that background and experience?
You bet. Thanks, Dave, for having me on your podcast. So RADAND is a design thinking firm, and we work with a very wide range of clients. Many of them are tech clients who are in the middle of what we call rapid complexity, very fast change. And we have developed an approach that allows organizations to implement change in iterative ways, but stay focused on their end goals. So when we talk about design thinking, we talk about starting at the end, which is the outcome that we want, and working our way backwards in our design, and then moving forward one step at a time in our planning and implementation.
Well, and RADAND is a relatively new organization for you, but the work you've been doing is not new. How long have you been doing this kind of work?
Most of my life. I have a very eclectic background. I started out life as a brand manager, in marketing, in international marketing, and I moved from there. And for about 10 years, I ran software firms. And after that, I had a friend who did educational architecture who asked me to come run one of his offices for a year. And I did that and fell in love with the design process and architecture, especially as it applies to education. But the fact is, I've worked with industries that are all over the map, from healthcare to architecture to high tech. And what you begin to see when you work with a myriad of clients like that are patterns that transcend the differences of each industry and are more tied to human behavior and how we actually make things happen. So what RADAND is about is this culmination of learning how different kinds of organizations have implemented change successfully and the kind of thinking that takes. And then we help organizations right now. What the past 5 years has been primarily tech firms who are well-funded startups move into the marketplace in a very expansive way and still maintain their focus on the value that they bring.
Yeah, I'm just really excited. I've had a number of conversations with you about this, and I'm really excited about the opportunities for school districts to really enter into this kind of design thinking process and iterative review process that you have used in other organizations in different kind of areas. And I know as you've done that, you've experienced a great amount of research in that process. You have key insights. We can't discuss all of that today, obviously, but I'd like you to share with the audience just some key insights or information about the research that's out there around design thinking and iterative review process.
Well, I think the thing that is most relevant to schools today, especially post-COVID, but I think this applied even prior to that, is we talk about change as discontinuous change. There are changes that are continuous, and we see the next step, and it's logical for us how we go from the step that we're in to the next step. But when life takes a big right turn or a big left turn, and suddenly we're in a place that we've not been before as an organization, it can be very disorienting. So the thoughts that we have around and the research that we have around how our brain works when we're confronted with rapid change that's unpredictable, I think is more relevant than ever for schools, because there's no organization that I know of that has more loud voices speaking into it as to what that school district should become. So when you have those kinds of constituencies that may not understand fully all the changes that you're making, it does make any kind of implementation difficult. So what we do, RAD really means from the root. And what we do is we go to the root of the issues that your school district, for instance, is facing. What is unique about the experience that you're being asked to bring based on the demographics, based on the location, based on so many things that are in flux. How do you stay true to the ultimate intention of your organization, in this case, a school that's providing learning experiences, while there's so much going on around it that is changing? So we talk about, if you're going to make iterative changes, which is the only way to make changes successfully, you have to stay focused on this ultimate intention. So we spend a good deal of investment with organizations defining that intention, and we talk about it in terms of experience. So, for instance, in a school, what is the experience that we want the student to have? What is the experience we want the teacher to have? And that's not just a surface trite question. I mean, we go into a great deal of explanation and description about these experiences so that we can stay focused on them. Once we've done that and there's clarity with your core team about what that experience needs to be, then we could talk about different expressions of that experience, the building, the curriculum delivery, all the things that it takes, the communication plans that it takes to do those things. But we're all rooted in that same experience that we're trying to create.
Wow. And it's true that those experiences may be common to some degree across districts, but there are going to be, to your point, some uniquenesses, and that review process will pull that out, I'm assuming, right? It'll just kind of reveal those things that are really important to the organization.
Talk about that. I'm sorry, David. Yes, we talk about that in terms of the experiences that you bring. The example I use is I love coffee and I love coffee shops, and coffee shops all do the same thing, right? But they don't all create the same experience when they do it. And most of organizational design and effectiveness training that I'm aware of focuses too much on what we do rather than the experience we cause while we do it. So, for instance, in branding, that's how you brand. You brand based on the experience, not on what you do. In a school district, you're doing a form of branding with your community. You're positioning yourself in their minds as to what is the experience that we're going to bring for your children. And that's very important that we not explain that in terms of what we do, because what we do is a means to an end. The end is the experience that we want, the end state that we want for our learners once we've done what we've done.
Wow. I just find that fascinating. And I think districts would find that fascinating as well. Now, if a district wanted to engage in this work, what are some of those kind of opportunities, what I like to call predictable positive outcomes, that they would want to make certain they communicated to their boards, to their internal and external communities before they even got started?
I think it's important that, first of all, you communicate. Everybody says this, of course, but that you communicate very robustly throughout your process. What's different about the approach that we take is at the beginning, it's a very internal process. It's the stewards of that school district, the people who are in leadership, are going to sit and represent the outcomes that they understand that these students need. But to do that with an outside constituency takes a lot of participation and communication. So often in our early workshops that we do to bring out this experience, to elicit it from our clients, we invite them to bring customers, and we would invite school districts to bring people from the community, all kinds of constituencies, into the conversation, so that when someday these ideas become implementation plans, you have people from every point of view, every major point of view of that implementation, who've been involved from the beginning. They weren't brought in at implementation to implement something they don't robustly understand. So bringing people down into the root thinking gives them a level of ownership of the ideas and the ability to communicate that back to certain constituencies. So I think it's very important that you not rush that first step, which is everybody wants a vision statement. Everybody, wants values listed, all these things. And it's all, those things are highly meaningful to the people who created them, but they're not as meaningful to the people who receive them later. So that's the first thing, is involve people and communicate and bring what we call clarity. It's one of our 5 C words, is clarity. And one of the things we say about clarity is that it takes dialogue. I'm not clear unless I've been fed back what I thought I said to you. And when the more expansive that conversation becomes, the more challenging that becomes. So it's very important that at the beginning, of this process, when you're thinking through the desired outcomes, that you have good, strong clarity with your core team, because they're going to translate that clarity back to their constituencies. It's almost like dialects of a language. We're going to say this a little different in each context, but we want to communicate that same thing back. And so we talk about the investment that you make up front pays off multiple times when you get into implementation.
Yeah, it strikes me just listening to you that obviously you're building a high level of transparency in the process, but through that, you're building really strong relationships with your community. And then down the road, as you said, you're creating a sense of ownership. So it's not just a district's kind of view of what the experience of the child, the teacher should be, but it's also the community's view of what that experience should be. And I can't help believe, but that would have great value to any organization. Now, if that being said, and you kind of gave a little bit of a cautionary tale, but I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit. What are those kind of implementation barriers that all districts should be aware of if they're to go down this pathway?
Well, there's a quote, David, we talked about in one of our conversations that I use a lot with clients, and it's from Machiavelli, and it says, change has no constituency. Now that we can map the brain and see it, we actually see that that's true. When my brain receives a pattern that it's not familiar with, the first thing I want to do is reject that pattern, purely because my brain is not used to that. And so when you bring change to an organization, when you bring change to education, when you bring change to a community, expect resistance and don't see that as a bad sign, because resistance is exactly what will happen, because it's the way our brains work. And it's much more about how we work through resistance with folks and bring clarity to them so that they then can create new patterns in their brains to accept changes. And so many times in life, when we see resistance, we get discouraged. And so if you're implementing change, we tell our clients, expect resistance, plan for it, and plan for how you will overcome it. But it's not a sign that things aren't going well. And often when clients are about to turn the corner on a change they're making is when they feel most discouraged, because that's when resistance can sometimes get the most intense. But resistance is not good or bad. It's just there, and we deal with it, but we expect it.
So it's interesting, Mark, that research out there about patterns in the brain and how that becomes somewhat fixed, and change obviously disrupts that and creates a little bit of resistance. So I'm guessing what you do as an organization is really help people understand how they can create new patterns for people that
Right.
they become comfortable with. And that would be amazingly helpful for districts, especially in this environment where change is an inevitable reality. I like to say change is like death and taxes. It's just as certain.
It
And
is. It
and
is.
so I think it's something that could be really, really powerful. Now, is there an organization or a district you would highlight that has done this work well?
Well, most of our clients recently have been tech clients, and I can't really name names, but what I'll say is the clients who do this well, um, they they understand that it's not a straight line. Change is not a straight line. That change involves emotional catharsis, really, especially if it's a large change. And so what they do is they focus on facts. They focus on their goals. They stay attuned to their goals, those ultimate end games that they've defined for themselves. And then they began to clarify things for people in order to overcome resistance. So involvement, clarification, toward the end goal, pointing people to that North Star, saying this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing, reminding people over and over. I'd say the people who are most successful are the ones who don't get tired of communicating that in multiple ways to multiple constituencies all the time. Communication is a very exhausting process sometimes as a leader, uh, because we tend to be in a different place with change than some of the folks that we're leading. But the willingness to engage people in their resistance, not as a negative, but as a part of their processing, and continually doing that and continually bringing people along and continually involving them, it's perseverance in the end. It's perseverance through the change that makes some organizations successful and some organizations less successful.
Interesting. Now, if a district or partner wanted to explore this work more deeply, how would they go about contacting you and arranging for deeper conversations?
Well, in the very near future, we're very excited. We're about to partner with an organization and create an entity for this just specifically for K-12 and very specifically for creating learning environments for districts. In the meantime, the best way is to reach me. It's Mark at RADAND, RADAND.com. And I'd be happy to sit down and talk with someone about how we can do this for schools. I spent 15 years doing architectural and other kinds of design and have worked with schools all over the world. And so we're excited to be back in this space. It's a meaningful space to be. It's a challenging space, and we're excited to help.
I'm excited for districts to get this experience. It's a unique experience in our world, having led districts for a number of years. I've not had this kind of opportunity, and I think it will reveal some positive opportunities for districts to manage the change that is inevitable in our world these days. And so I want to thank you, Mark, for being a part of this important work of supporting our students in schools. And I want to thank you for your participation in a L.E.A.R.N podcast.
Well, thanks for the invitation, Dave.